All right, guys, so we'll go ahead and get things started. Good evening, everyone. My name is Katie McCarter, and I'm CBS Hampton Roads Administrative Assistant. I would also like to introduce Alice Chrisman. She's the wonderful lady behind the scenes who's helping me keep this ship running. I could not have done this whole presentation without her, so I really appreciate all your hard work, Alice. And So before we get started, I would like to direct everybody's attention to the bottom of the screen. There's a Q&A feature and a chat feature at the bottom of your screen. The Q&A feature are going to be where I would like for you to put any and all questions that you have during the presentation. We'll be addressing all questions at the end for the last 10 or 15 minutes during the Q&A session. And then there's also a chat feature, and the chat feature is actually where Alice is going to be dropping helpful links throughout the presentation. So make sure you keep an eye on that. So with business out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and get this show on the road. So the Brock Learning Series are generally designed to provide information on a particular biological aspect of the Chesapeake Bay, or to kind of speak about humans' positive or negative contributions to its health. CBS staff members can talk about until their faces turn blue about blue crabs, oysters, nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, but we're going to kind of take a back seat on those kinds of topics tonight and actually open up the floor to the Chesapeake Bay's native inhabitants. Now, at CBF, our goal is to remove nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment are still just as important, but we realize throwing science at these issues can only go so far. The special ingredients that we need are people, and we are lucky enough to have all types of individuals, cultures, and religions throughout our watershed. Over the past month, while working on this webinar, I've had several eye-opening conversations with this group of panelists. And during those times, I've had several never thought of it that way moments. And if you've ever had a moment like that before, you realize how profound they are and how much they really do shape your perspective. And so in recognition of that, I would like to bring to your attention a new tradition called Honor Native Lands. The movement encourages speakers and hosts to start their meeting, speech, or webinar by acknowledging the traditional native inhabitants of the land. So to start this presentation off, even though I've kind of already have done that, I would like to recognize the Indigenous people of Chesapeake Bay and am honored to be their host tonight. So I'm going to turn it over the floor to them and give them a couple seconds to introduce themselves. So first we have Beth Roach, Tribal Councilwoman with the Nottoway tribe. Go ahead, Beth.
Nottoway. Yeah, Nottoway, Ganaha. Kiase Beth Roach from the Nottoway Indian Tribe of Virginia. My little star is down there on the edge of the Albemarle Sound. So that's where I am right now. I'm in traditional territory of Southern Iroquois folk. So Southern Haudenosaunee of Tuscarora, Meharry, and Nottoway. But I grew up in Surrey County, which straddles the Chesapeake Bay watershed and the Albemarle Pamlico watershed. So I have lots of fun things that I do day to day. I'm a seed keeper, founder of Alliance of Native Seed Keepers. I work for the Sierra Club in development and lead a Women's Earth Alliance grassroots accelerator program. And I'm super excited. I'm also Tribal Resilience Director, a new initiative for the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs. And I'm so honored to be on this panel with all of y'all. So no way.
Thanks, Beth. So the next one is going to be Nikki Bass, Tribal Councilwoman for the Nansemond Indian Nation.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nikki Bass, and I do serve as a councilwoman for the Nansemond Indian Nation. It's fitting that I come on after Beth because our communities are closely connected, and as she mentioned, my star is there in the center of Hampton Roads. I actually grew up in Baltimore, so I've spent my entire life somewhere on the Chesapeake Bay, and I'm often back and forth. So you can wave to me on 95 somewhere. But I work as an environmental chemist at the United States Environmental Protection Agency. And I'm very interested in using environmental science from an Indigenous mindset to solve some of our environmental challenges that we're facing in the Chesapeake Bay. So thank you so much for having me on the panel, and I'm honored to be here with everybody tonight.
Thanks, Nikki. And then we have Reggie Tupponce, Tribal Administrator for the Upper Mattaponi tribe.
Good evening. My name is Reggie Tupponce. I am the Tribal Administrator for the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Upper Mattaponi Indian Tribe. I'm also Mattaponi. In my position with the tribe, I run and administer our programs, um, which are housing, natural resources, right now, response to COVID-19, and any other programs that we try to take over to help out our citizens. I've lived in Virginia between the Mattaponi and Pamunkey rivers for most of my life. We are water people. I come from a family of watermen. My grandfather fished, ran nets in the Mattaponi River when I was young. We still have tribal members that do that to this day, and myself and my son are both avid fishermen as well.
Thanks, Reggie. And last but definitely not least, Gabrielle Tayac, historian of the Piscataway Indian Nation.
Well, I'd like to give you all greetings and Thanksgivings and a special hello to our relatives that are on the Virginia side further to the south, and all of the family, kin, allies, supporters, people of a good mind that have joined us this evening. I'm Gabi Tayac, and I am a member of the Piscataway Indian Nation. We're the indigenous people of what is now today called Maryland. So you'll see my little star kind of at the southern, kind of the southern area of our territories, originally coming from Washington all the way down to the Chesapeake Bay along the Potomac. I have come from a pretty long tradition of human and indigenous rights activism, which started at, from the time I was a child, watching what was going on in my family and wanting to know what had happened and what had inspired us. So that led me on an academic path. I went ahead and became a scholar, but very much rooted into uplifting our indigenous knowledge in a way that can be shared and understood and valued. So I was a founding curator for 18 years at Smithsonian National Museum of the American Indian, and I am currently an associate professor of public history focusing on indigenous studies at George Mason University. So it's great to be with you here tonight and all of our different facets and ways of coming together.
Thanks, Gabrielle. Okay, so this webinar is going to be a Q&A style. We have a series of questions that each panelist will answer and have a chance to kind of chat about their tribal communities' take on these types of environmental issues or historical roles. So the first question is, can each of you speak to the Native American roles historically in the Bay region? The first up we actually have is Beth. Oh, actually, no, Gabrielle, sorry.
Okay, yeah, so, when you talk about history, first I want people to think about history as something that can go far beyond what we would think about with written time or European text or context on this land. What you see in these maps it's really a kind of a snapshot in time. But when you talk about the indigenous peoples of the Bay, including indigenous peoples anywhere in the Americas, you're talking about people who as we see it, a relationship that's been built, cultures that have been created in relationship and what we call reciprocity with the lands that we live on. So our historic role, it's huge. I'd like to just make a mention of what the relationship is with the waters that we're speaking about tonight and with each other. Essentially what you have is a 10,000 year documented history. You have a timeless history that's rooted in our spoken narratives, and one that has been built with peoples that live in a way that has created agriculture, scientific ways, through observation, natural science of looking at the ways that we live on the land, and one that's been disrupted for a number, for a number of centuries now, but one that's always been carried for a long time. So I think in terms of the historic role, it's been to adapt and change, but always keep a core of an understanding of who we are as peoples. And these are what you see are distinct Native peoples, most of which are Algonquin, were originally what we call Algonquin speakers. But also those like with Nottoway belongs to another language family, and another a little bit to the west, the Monacans. So what you really see is a rich, amazing array of people who have been here for a very, very long time. And hey, we can talk about this for a lifetime, so I'll defer to my other panelists as well.
Reggie, you ready?
Yes, I am. I kind of look at the area from two different perspectives. One is like the watershed and overall, and our dependence on it historically and even to this day is just all the water that comes down, whether it's for drinking, for our plants, for the animals. And then there's also our waterways that really run through our communities. And then from historic times, we would have traveled by water. We would have used it to catch fish. The creeks would have supplied water and groundwater for our plants. And then also it would have provided security, a defensive line. So the impact that it had on us was pretty immense. We had an extensive dependence on the Chesapeake Bay and the other waterways within that whole watershed within our region. And even to this day, you'll see that many of the tribes still rely on it to some point. And then culturally as well, we were tied, to the water. As the sign I see in the background, "Water is life," was just as important back in the earlier times than it was. And another thing I'd like to say, kind of going off of what Gabrielle had said, is we tend to look at history so much in these contexts. It's contact time, or whether it's out west, it's the during the Indian Wars there. And I like to focus more on, for lack of a better term, prehistory. We had a history before the Spanish came, before the English came. So, as Gabrielle said, 10,000 years of documented history. And we've been influenced by the watershed, by the waterways, and we've influenced as well.
Thank you, Reggie. Nikki?
Sure. So I love the comments being shared. And one of the things I was excited about tonight was not just participating, but listening to our relatives' perspectives. And I'll just add to that for Nansemond, as you look at us there on the map to the right, one thing I like to share with people is, yes, our ancestral settlements were originally on both sides of the Nansemond River and throughout that region. But over time, through colonization, we were pushed from the river toward the Elizabeth River, toward the Great Dismal Swamp. And so when we talk about our history, we don't talk only about what you see on John Smith's map or the very first settlements. We think about our evolution over time and our resilience under colonial pressures. And something that Gabby mentioned was relationships. Our relationship to our ancestral river is extremely important, and so are the ways that we survived as we moved and built relationships to preserve our communities. And I will say that for the past 400 years, we've been struggling to regain access. We have about 75 acres on the Nansemond River today, known as Mattaponi, which was the name of an original settlement from our community. But when you look at all the other privately owned waterfront land on the Nansemond River, that is a very small fraction. And so when you're trying to help a community to rebuild its relationship to the water and to the land, it's extremely important to keep access at the front of our perspective in our discussions. I'll say that, we are related to the Nottoway. We have relationships to many of the coastal Algonquian people that you see on this map here. So it's a very, very long conversation to capture all of our history, but we're excited to be able to put it in the context of the Chesapeake Bay and to share what we're working on today.
Thanks, Nikki. And Beth?
Yeah, so agree, we can talk about this for such a long time. One thing that I've picked up on in my studies just growing up and knowing, you know, pulling together my family history, living in Surrey, and then really being cognizant of this divide of the watershed. Like there's a farmer that lives near my parents' house where one stream goes towards the Chesapeake Bay and the other stream goes towards the Albemarle Sound. So just really being present with, okay, there's these two watersheds happening, and then learning more about our pre-contact civilizations. If you look at some of these linguistic groups and you overlay the watershed maps, it's really incredible how they line up. And y'all know that's not an accident, right? Like we absolutely knew where our headwaters were, where that's where really amazing fresh water is coming from. And we absolutely, like Reggie said, like we had all these creeks and streams and we absolutely knew how to get to each other. And as we've gotten to this amazing space, thank you, internet, where we're all in touch with each other every single day, I'm so blessed to be able to work in this space where, I'm down in North Carolina. I've spent most of my life in Virginia. And what I'm seeing is this pattern of this Algonquian, speakers on the East Coast. And then we have Iroquoian there in the middle. And then we have the Siouan speakers. And so historically, like we were always connected to each other. And for us Iroquois folk, like we were right in the middle. And so historically we were very good at bartering. And sometimes we were on like a good memory of folks, and so maybe sometimes not. I don't know. It depends on whose deal was favored or not. So, our communities are so incredibly entwined. A lot of our folks are doing these gen matches where, like, we're taking our DNA and we're comparing them to each other, and there's an amazing amount of cousins that are popping up, and it's just because we've always been intertwined and we've always been connected to each other. And so I really would love for y'all to take that away. It's like, yes, like I'm Nottoway, Reggie is Mattaponi, we got Gabby Piscataway, and Nikki is Nansemond, but trust that we are so related on so many different facets, and that our DNA really knows that, and our water absolutely connected us. And just one more thing, like I travel a lot in between Albemarle Sound up to Surrey, up to Richmond, and I am so fascinated by atlases and maps, and there are a million different ways you can get to each other. So please know that we were definitely hanging out and we're just so grateful to be here in this space now to show you all that.
Thanks so much, Beth. All right, so we'll go ahead and go to our second question. Can each of you speak to the Native American current roles in the Bay region? And the first person that I have for this question is Reggie.
Thank you. The roles that we play now are pretty multifaceted. Like a lot of other people today, we use the water for fun and recreation, fish, some to eat. But also I see one of our roles is being the protector of the environment. Over my lifetime, I've seen, highly polluted waterways become relatively clean again, and some go back the other way once again. And, we've always had this reliance on the water, and, without clean water, without clean air, it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can't live. So we've been struggling with how we can do our normal things to take care of ourselves, but also take care of the environment as well. In King William County, where we are located, there's the two of the oldest reservations in the United States, the Mattaponi and Pamunkey, which date back to 1658. And then our tribe, the Upper Mattaponi, we do not have a reservation at this time. Well, both of those tribes have run hatcheries on the river. Shad hatcheries previously, although it's been harder to get the shad. Pamunkey is working right now towards doing sturgeon. So there's this acknowledgement for us that the bay, our waterways, need our help. They've always been there to provide that sustenance to us. And now the roles have kind of reversed a little bit, where we need to protect them. And hopefully through more sustainable practices, partnering, with farmers and ranchers in cities and localities to minimize their impact on the watershed, then we can work to have it be more, vital for the fish to be edible, more so for, shellfish to come back and thrive and be edible. And then it'll sustain us once again. So from both sides, I see, our use patterns, still fishing and still eating out of the rivers and out of the bay, but also I see a greater role of us becoming the protectors once again.
Thanks, Reggie. Nikki?
Sure. So I will jump right into the photo on the screen because it ties into this question. And I'll say that our current role is restoring our relationship to the Nansemond River and also starting pilot projects to help members of our community as well as our neighbors in the region learn about our history with shellfish. These oysters in the picture here are oyster shells with baby spat, and this is when Chesapeake Bay Foundation joined us to begin our oyster garden at Mattaponi. And so just as each little spat on a shell is a new oyster life, we view these as new partnerships, new opportunities for our people to build relationships with community groups, local government, state government, federal government. We're growing opportunities, and having an oyster garden is a sustainable way to improve the water quality. And you start as a little garden, but it increases over time. We can add oyster cages. We've been working on shoreline stabilization by building reef balls with Chesapeake Bay and Nansemond River Preservation Alliance. And we really see these community projects as a way to correct incomplete education about our tribe and to help people to begin the narrative around the river and around the bay and Hampton Roads with the Indigenous community. A lot of times I see, if you go to a history section of a local website, it starts with English settlers and then it goes into the oystermen. And you can't become partners if you're not even thinking about the other people in your community. So it's really important to me that we continue projects like this as an organic way to build relationships, to help people touch things, be in the water, go kayaking, and just live and feel the environment that our ancestors were in, and then feel, as Reggie said, as a true steward. Indigenous stewardship of our waters and our lands is a way to transform land use, which is a big part of pollution in the area. So we're just really grateful and we're excited. We know we'll all be tired and have a lot of gray hair by the time we see progress, but we're committed and grateful for allies.
Thanks, Nikki. I love that photo too. Beth?
Nikki, what y'all are doing is so inspiring. It's so amazing. Nottoway for that. And current roles in the Bay region and at large. I come from a climate justice organizing background amongst other things. I was park ranger for a while. And so this notion of protection has been with me, but I got to tell y'all, when we were faced with the threat of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, everybody was looking at Standing Rock and they saw what was happening there. And then they started to look at the tribes here on the East Coast and they were like, okay, where is the Standing Rock? Where is the encampment? And I felt like pressure to try to do something to that level. And so what I learned there in that process is, folks, like, we have only got our recognition, but for so long. Like, we've had our state recognition for over a decade. These folks have just gotten their federal recognition after more than 2 decades, more, 3, I don't know, Reggie can tell us. And others are fighting other, how many? It was a long time. And so, what we're trying to do right now is figure out, okay, like, how do we enter this space? Like, we have to, educate so many people about like who we are and where we are and what language we speak and the fact that we are still here. And we also have to grapple with the threats that our climate are facing. And truly, y'all, we don't have a tremendous amount of capacity to do that. We don't have, just the hours in the day, and we also don't have a lot of the knowledge. Nikki, and I'm so grateful to you for joining the Virginia Environmental Justice Council with me. Was the lone voice in the room trying to explain these things to folks. And what Nikki and I've talked about a lot is that we need to help to educate our tribal communities just as much as we need to help to educate everybody listening and stakeholder governments and everybody about what does it mean to be a tribal community, what does it mean to have meaningful engagement, and what does it mean to to co-live in this space. I'll say our tribe has been doing this cleanup on one of our favorite parts of the Nottoway River for over a decade. And through that, it's been amazing community building. But we've also really spent a lot of time observing the environment around us. And one thing that I see a lot happening in the Albemarle Pamlico watershed, which has been protected a bit in the Bay watershed, is this expansive and extensive logging. And so it's like, how do we help to educate ourselves on advocating for better protections on logging of our swamps and things? I mean, that's just a small example, but we're here, we're learning, we're getting dirty, we're in the water. And I can tell you, this is just, the beginning of this conversation. And like Nikki said, like, we're going to be, this is a long game. We're in it for a very long time.
I feel the gray hairs already. Gabrielle, would you mind answering some of those questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to really being in this space where we can build and support what each other are saying, because it has been such a long experience. This really is an intergenerational. This is an intergenerational process. There were many years, decades, times where when you get to the sense of protection, it's really there was a period of just having for people to hang on to their lives, to hang on to their names, to try to come back to who we were. The idea that, like, the very first message at National Museum of the American Indian, the big headline was, "We are still here." And so, when you start that, like, that's your starting point. From that, there's like the outside, the education, the work, the advocacy, the banging on the door, the being the lone voice. There is a sense of, there's just been an amazing transformation in the past several generations. It's because there were people who got up, every day. So part of the role is to make sure that, especially coming from communities like ours, that it means that you can never rely on somebody else to do this. Every single one of us, both individually and within our family, the best that we can. We all have our lives, right? Like, everybody's got a day job, everybody's got, tries to work, and we all, have our lives just like, everybody else. And then there's this added thing that is so essential to our core. Even our very names, like Piscataway means where the waters blend, right? So like our names, like our identities, really are so enmeshed with this space. And a lot of it has to do with repair, restoration, what we're calling, regeneration. And a word that I'll get to a little while later is rematriation. But it's this idea of protection, healing, and growth. It was just to even be able, when we talk about recognition, there's been so much work that's been done, where somebody's entire lifetime had been spent just to protect graves, to get our graves protected. Something that's really essential to understand about Indigenous people is that environment, religion, spirituality, identity, ways of being, ways of thinking about ourselves in our fullest expression, it's not divided up, right? It's not like, we have to because of the way things are now. So I think our current role, there's an internal role. I see there's an internal role for healing, for transmitting, for taking care of our spaces and our children within our values, which are deeply ancestral. That's the word I like to use. That, by the way, is I like to use the word ancestral, versus like prehistory, like kind of gets it deep. And then also an idea of being in the position to set up dialogues like these. You know, we're actually, Native people are really busy, like always speaking out. And so this is part of our role, I think, is in a forum like this, is to be able to say, you know, here's the information, like now, you know, it's up to both of us to do this. So I think it's a real issue of looking very carefully at the protection of our spaces. This happens all the time, whether it's like deforestation in Nansemond, whether it's you know, a road being built over ancestors that have been buried there, educating people. So it's also, I think it's really right now is an idea of partnering in a wider sense. This is the generational change. The generational change right now I see is that it's not just like it's Native people and other people, with Native people having to say, look, you have to look at the waters as a relative. Everybody has to look at it at this way, as a living being. You know, it's like we really, really are in the same boat, and there's no denying it now. So that's, you know, it's just some of the roles, but that's kind of fundamental, I think.
Yeah, wow, I can't, kind of mind blowing to think about how much we are kind of interconnected in every way. So, we'll go ahead and move on to question 3. Can each of you speak to where you would like to see the role of your tribe? And the first person that I have up is Nikki.
Sure. So I can say in the future, and the present and the future, I have a number of urgent priorities on my mind, with the first being something that several other panelists have mentioned, and that's building internal capacity for engagement. Our culture does not teach us about interacting with bureaucracies or government administrations. These are things we have to learn, just like anyone else in the general public has to learn. How do you navigate these systems to influence what's happening? And so I would love to see us build our education, engage in research, and pursue civic leadership positions, so that we're not just leading our tribe, but helping to shape the conversation in the broader community. We've seen many Native American members of Congress, and we want to see more. We want to represent ourselves and to shift these changes that are happening around us, so that we're not always being victimized and we're not always reacting to what's happening. And actually, Katie, you mentioned something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, and Gabby mentioned it too. We are always speaking about our ancestry and our relationship to the land and the water. Once we share that message, we want the community to become allies. And if you are in a conversation and you do not hear the Indigenous perspective being represented where it should be, please feel empowered to say something, because we can't accomplish this alone. And it's something that's very important. I think about how often we say how we've been colonized. Well, feel free to be indigenized. Like, we want you to start thinking about our perspective and thinking about, what is different now? How has the world evolved? How can we advocate for positive change together? And so those are at the forefront of my mind. The pictures here, I wish we had more pictures. Everyone who knows me knows I have thousands of pictures. But to me, when I see these images, they're me and my relatives being Indigenous in spaces that have been heavily, heavily colonized. And how does that look? Sometimes it looks like wearing your powwow regalia. That's contemporary. That is not fully traditional. It's part of our culture. Sometimes it's wearing Western, just wearing your normal clothing, a piece of jewelry, something that reminds you of your community and your connection. And sometimes it's wearing, whatever, but just speaking your truth, speaking your experience, and being present and reminding people that we are here. So that's what I see for the future. The past is colonized. Let's indigenize the future and use our culture and our relationships to revolutionize the world. And I'll just say very quickly, I do see being engaged in social justice and environmental justice as a big part of that, because I don't see any of these initiatives in isolation. I see all of these things as interconnected, and I see ways for the Indigenous influence to help us return to a healthier world.
Thanks, Nikki. Beth?
Yes, everybody indigenize yourselves. Absolutely. So I'd like to share 2 projects that I'm working on. The one that I kicked off this summer, Tribal Coastal Resilience Connections, that's through the North Carolina Commission on Indian Affairs. It's a grant from the EPA through the Albemarle Pamlico National Estuary. It just took me forever to learn how to say all that. And what it is starts a conversation with our tribal communities in North Carolina, Virginia, and truly Indian country at large, to start talking about what kind of future we want to see for our rivers and waterways, and what threats and concerns we see, and how we want to go forward with it. We have a Facebook page, so find that, Tribal Coastal Resilience Connections. We are asking for water stories, similar to what CBF is doing, but it's really just to start getting people to talk, because that map, you know, they're frozen in time, like Nikki was saying, like that snapshots, maps are snapshots, but we are as a people moving all around all the time. And so we want to show that. And people have a lot of layman's knowledge. They don't have.
Beth, I think we lost you. If you can hear me.
This is your webinar producer, and it looks like Beth is rejoining us now. Beth? She's coming back. Hi, Beth.
Sorry about that.
It's okay.
So yes, it's Tribal Coastal Resilience Connections. So a part of this project is studying coastal adaptation plans from all over the country. We have a PhD student from NC State working with Dr. Ryan Emanuel, who's Lumbee, and the PhD student is Jocelyn Painter. She's Winnebago of Nebraska. And so coming out of that, we're going to have a pilot project of what that might look like. And thankfully for us, the Chowan River Basin, which is where the Nottoway and the Meherrin form and flow into the Albemarle Sound. They have this like draft plan open, and so we're working together with DEQ staff to just to start a conversation. We're working with them, and other than that, we have the Alliance of Native Seed Keepers, which when we started to organize seed keepers, we realized that all the seed keepers were also the ones that were heavy in advocacy. And so building on what Nikki was saying, we're really interested in building a platform so that we can share these advocacy skills with each other in order to continue this momentum.
Thanks, Beth. All right, Gabrielle, you ready?
Yeah, I'm ready. So, I mean, I think, in terms of the roles of our tribes are, and specifically, I want to speak a little bit about where we are as Piscataway, because we're part of our traditional territory is in DC. We have been in this position to welcome and host and walk alongside so many Indigenous peoples, whether they're from North, Central, or South America for generations. And I think that role continues. So it is a sense of hosting, of advocating alongside with. That's a really essential role. So we do have, when we're talking about tribes like ours, we tend to be, in proximity to very, to urban areas, even for those of us, for those people that are still in more, rural areas. It's not too far away from larger areas. So we do have a lot of global interconnectivity. And at the same time, it's a matter of being very grounded in who we are and where we are, and taking care of our own home spaces. So that's why I think for Piscataway in particular, we have been very active in the international arena, and continue to be at this point it's like Zoom wise, but in terms of, and that really is essential to also understanding what happens in our own waterways. When people come here, I often will take them, to the water, right? To remind us of how it all flows together and how important that is. So that's kind of a wider view. Coming down into it though, and into our home spaces, we have had a very, very long, like I said, a very, very long struggle to have our sacred sites protected, our home areas protected and recognized. So at this point, I think like we really engaged in these like large movements, and we're still engaged with them, and we're still a part of them, and they're very like forceful. One thing that I'm a big trend that I'm seeing, and that I think we're really glad to be a part of, is in this concept of rematriation. So developing the idea that there is a cultural, feminine energy that probably was more completely, there's attempts to more completely erase that than anybody else. It's really enormous. So we're in a sensibility now of creating land and cultural based projects, really innovating it, seeing how we can work with, really more of like this idea of regeneration. I love that word, to regenerate, and the sense of like what Beth is doing with the seeds, and how people are now creating those spaces. So I think the real role, and this is going to sound so cliched, but like I'm old enough now, and actually Reggie and I, Reggie was talking about his your children, like you have the capacity now of all of the work and all of the the day-to-day waking up that our ancestors did, our grandparents, our parents, maybe us, in a different sense when we were younger, every day making that decision. And what that means is that we have a generation now that they never knew a time when they couldn't say what their native names were, that they didn't feel like it was okay, if they were a boy, to have their hair long, to be able to go to their grounds and to know exactly where they were. And I'm seeing this amazing kind of confidence and awareness that they can now take it into like the next level. I'm seeing with like Beth and Nikki. It's just this is very transformative. So it's like less fear, more confidence, not having just to fight to say what your name is. So I think our role now is to be able to push it into feeling comfortable enough with what the foundations are, and then you can be really creative and innovative and not be as afraid to connect. So I think that's what our roles are, is again continuing those relationships, maintaining our uniqueness and our distinctiveness, but also not feeling threatened by reaching out to others and having others be involved. So that's kind of writ large where it is, and there's all kinds of details that go with that, but that's kind of the big picture.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Reggie, last but not least.
Still trying to absorb everything that Gabrielle just threw out at us. That was a lot and some powerful stuff. Back to something that Beth had said earlier about how long federal recognition. Well, in the 70s, the federal government created a federal acknowledgement process, and most of our tribes ended up on the other side of that line. So our tribe actually filed a letter of intent in 1979, and our bill was passed in 2018, so almost 40 years. But we had petitioned the federal government in the late 1880s, 1890s for education funds because we couldn't get educated in the schools here. So the battle has been going on a lot longer than that. Other tribes, I know the Nansemond has documentation back further than that, where they petitioned to the federal government for support. So this battle hasn't been a decade or several decades. It has been generations and generations. And that leads me to the pictures that Nikki had referred to. The picture to the right of the two young people, well, the young man is one of my relatives. He's 2 generations removed from me, so my first cousin's grandson. And that's what I see my role as, and my tribe's role as, is assuring a future for them, a future that's better than what we have now. Cleaner water, cleaner air, and the ability for them to provide a better future for the generations to come. And I had written down a bunch of things of what I saw our role as, but they're really, just things. For me, strengthening our cultural tie to the water, to the land. Well, rebuilding our communities. Here in King William, we're under pressure from development. We have very few properties that are still in family hands. I have to go to other counties to hunt because the properties around here that we normally hunt are rented out to clubs from, wealthier areas. Even to fish sometimes, go out and go kayaking in the river, and you've got boats flying up, up the river. So it's dangerous at times. So, how do we create that environment for them to grow and prosper within their cultural being? So in that that comfortable nature that Gabrielle was saying about, their existence now, where they haven't seen the trials and tribulations that other generations have, where they're comfortable with who they are. Well, how do we assure that they get to fulfill that? How to, have that environment, have that community to be able to sustain that development and to continue the existence of our peoples? Because in the end, that, for me, that's what it's about. You can look at those names, on those maps, and sometimes you can scramble them around. I know our people were all over the area in Lancaster, at some point all the way up the other side of the Potomac as pressures, pushed us. But, we're less tied to, a name written on a map as we are to our cultural being, and to our region as a whole. And now seeing how our tribes have worked well together for decades, working on federal recognition, working on other issues. Those of us who are a little bit older, who have traveled powwows and a lot of roads over time and had that connection there, I'm seeing the young people connect again over culture, and not the powwow culture, more traditional, more Eastern culture, whether it's dance, song, craft. And that's powerful to me, as powerful as those oysters growing, in the Nansemond River. It is truly a rebirth, and that makes me happy.
Thanks, Reggie. And thank you all. These were just really powerful and thoughtful answers. Thank you guys so much for all of the time that you guys have put into this. We don't have too much time for closing remarks, but I would like for if you guys wanted to just give a couple seconds just to say thanks if you wanted to, so then we can get over to Q&A, because I don't know if you guys have noticed, but we got quite a bit. So, so first off, maybe Beth, would you mind just doing a brief closing remark?
Yes, I'm going to do it in Nottoway. Yukware dase igwehegwe ine hon roach alwe one jogaktigekwa. So we are so grateful for all the people. We're so grateful for all of the land, and we're so grateful for all the water. And let's go forward with one mind. No way.
That was beautiful. Gabrielle?
Well, just to also just take in, that we have had circle and the questions flashing by, but also to remember that this is an ongoing and always changing conversation, and looking at it with gratitude. And when we all leave here, I think when we all leave here and turn off our screen and maybe we go into our living room or wherever it is, but to always take a moment to consider where you are, greet the waters. I saw a question flash by about, well, how do you indigenize? Is that cultural appropriation? To be what we're talking about is an approach. It's an approach from the heart. It's not the details of what songs are you singing and what are you wearing. It's a way of being. And so that's where we move forward from, as a way of being.
Thank you. All right, Reggie?
I'll be very short to save some time for questions. Don't just be an outsider. Don't look. Be engaged. It can be as simple as taking a bag with you on a walk and picking up a piece of trash, or when you go kayaking, pulling the bottles out of the water. It's as much your environment as it is ours. And if we all work together, it'll be better.
Here, here. All right, Nikki.
Yes, I will be quick too to leave time for questions, but I just want to say a heartfelt thank you to every participant that joined us, to all of my people on the panel who lift me up, lift our communities up. I'm so grateful. And I just want to share a quick comment tying into what Reggie said, that, many people are familiar with Indigenous cultures further west, Plains cultures. Well, as Reggie said, we are Eastern Woodland people. We are coastal people. We are so proud of our connection to the Chesapeake Bay. We wear it. I'm wearing a crab for everybody today. If you look at this image here, you see shells, you see pieces of our environment in our regalia, in our lives, because we honor that. So we don't just live on the land and live in the water. We feel it as our life force. And it's, as Gabby said earlier, it's about reciprocity. So to just quickly touch on that comment about how do you indigenize by not thinking about how you can use the land or use the water, but how can you be in relationship with it, so that when you are engaging, you don't enter thinking of what you can take, but thinking of what you can contribute to a cycle that will preserve itself. So just to close, I'm so thankful, and we hope to be part of many more conversations in the future.
Thank you all so much. All right, so let's go ahead and get to our Q&A, because we got quite a bit, guys. So I'll go ahead and just start. So they're chronological order. So Aaron Lee asked the question, I live in Alexandria, Virginia. When making a land acknowledgement, which tribe would I say lived on this land? And we'll just leave everybody unmute, guys, and you guys and anybody can answer whatever you feel appropriately. I don't know. Do you guys have an answer? I to be honest, when I was actually looking to acknowledge during the meeting, I had to ask these guys about how to appropriately ask, because I wasn't quite sure how to address. And so they mentioned just mentioning the Chesapeake Bay Indigenous culture in general, just because there are so many different and there's so many interconnectivity between them that, it's important just to recognize them all. So maybe that's something that if you are in the Chesapeake Bay watershed, you are able to kind of do that. If you are aware of potentially a tribe that's near you, maybe reach out to them to see if they have any questions, or if they have any more thought about that. Do you guys have any follow up with that, or you think that's good?
I'll take a short stab at it.
Okay.
and I think we had this conversation before, is that there's, for lack of a better word, historical tribes that were in that area. Some tribes, as a separate unit, are no longer in existence. Their people have become part of other tribes, or tribes have moved together. So be thoughtful and about how you approach it. And it's better to be more inclusive than it is to be exclusive.
Good point. Gabrielle, did you want to say something, or you're good?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is something that we turn over a lot, and it's okay. Yeah, it's good to think about, acknowledgement in the sense of not only about the people that were there, if because of the forces of colonization, they weren't able to, they were either exterminated as a particular group of people or had to blend in, and understanding that not all the lines and limits are as fixed on those maps. The main thing about acknowledgement is doing exactly what Chesapeake Bay Foundation is doing tonight, which is, to the best of your ability, to create and sustain meaningful relationships. What do you have to offer those communities? So yeah, take a look, especially on the Virginia side, who's there now, and not be as concerned with, the pigeonholing of like exactly who's within this boundary. Like, that's the last thing we want to start fighting about.
Good point. Okay. So somebody mentioned, when you say get your water and land back, how do you do this? By purchasing, which I would assume that that's probably a good thing, or maybe even contributions or something. But Nikki, I believe that you're the one that actually brought this up. Would you mind answering this question?
Sure. So it's really a difficult challenge to get your land back. A lot of land is privately owned, as Reggie mentioned. I also have to go to public spaces, to go kayaking, to really do anything in relationship with the water. You have to share space unless you can acquire it yourself. And for many of our tribes, purchasing land is just very difficult. Raising money to do it, and then taking care of it once you have it. So I know for us, it took us a very long time to get our land at Mattaponi, but we're trying to access more land to build our programs and also to share it with the community. There are sometimes grants that can help people now. You can work on developing conservation easements to ensure that the land is not developed and it's protected in its natural state. So there are more opportunities for us now that we have our federal recognition, but it's still a challenge and a major learning curve to continue to increase your access to the land.
And I have something to add. So we would love to have the ability to have land back and water back, but we also live in reality, right? It's not going to happen to the full extent. But what could happen, and if we could all just envision this, if we are truly at the table when we are talking about how are we managing the water and the resources and the land and all of that. I mean, like truly, like free, prior, informed consent, look it up, UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights, like from the get-go. And so like that could be, in my mind, land and water back, is you have us absolutely fully engaged in these conversations outside of jurisdictions and such, but just like, please, bring us to the table.
It's a great point. So we have another great question. For those of us working toward Chesapeake Bay restoration, what are some important things you want us to know or understand that you think we are missing in our effort?
So I can just add some things in, and I think again, it's what's happening here now, is understanding that right, natural spaces, they're also cultured, they're also peopled, that they have meanings and connections to communities that have been here for a long time. So to consider the ways that different, communities approach these spaces, to look into elements of, right, the Western-based science, but also what the traditional knowledge is, to get a sense of the depth of the history. I think the restoration in this project I'm working on in Nansemond right now, which is a tributary of the Potomac on the Maryland side in Southern Maryland, it's not only about protecting and bringing up and restoring and making open the spaces, recreationally. Some of these spaces have a deep spiritual meaning. A lot of the lands and peoples around them, and some of the people who can't, be there anymore, like we were talking about this land back issue of being a lot of our families, we got pushed off the water, people got pushed out, people ended up in towns and cities, and people are like, oh, well, you don't even know what that, you're supposed to be an Indian, like, you don't know what that flower is, like, what's wrong with you? And it's like, well, you know what? It's like a lot of our people couldn't be there anymore. People got priced out. So thinking about how to bring in the full story, bring in that full story of the natural elements, the peopled elements, the historic elements. What's missing? Like, if something's not there, there was probably something there before. There was somebody there before. Why are they not there, and what happened? Right. So these are kinds of, like, I like to call it the presence of our absence. Sometimes is a good way to just be open in that way.
And it looks like we're a little bit past our time, but maybe if we have one more question. Reggie, this one actually went directly to you, and it was, what are the future plans for the Mattaponi shad hatchery?
Well, that'll give me a chance for some teaching there. The Mattaponi reservation and the Upper Mattaponi are two separate entities, although related. The Mattaponi people reside on the Mattaponi reservation, which is actually where the Tupponce side of my family is from. And they have not attained federal recognition yet. The Upper Mattaponi, we live about 20 miles or so up the river, and is a community made predominantly of Mattaponi people, some ties to Pamunkey and then Chickahominy, as well. But we are a separate tribe and a separate governance dating back, literally hundreds of years. As far as the shad hatchery there is concerned, I don't know what Mattaponi is doing specifically. I do know that Pamunkey had issues getting shad for their hatchery over the last couple of years. The runs have been so small up into the rivers that it wasn't enough to sustain the hatchery. So I think that they have made some shifts towards working on sturgeon. So I would think that that might be an issue with Mattaponi, but I wouldn't know exactly because I'm the tribal administrator of Upper Mattaponi, if that helps.
It does. Thank you so much. And unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer everybody's questions, but we will, over the next couple of days, anybody that did ask a question, we will answer your question directly to your email. So yes, so I'm going to go ahead and close everything off now. I just want to say thank you all so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. All the panelists, all the attendees, all of the people at Chesapeake Bay Foundation that actually made this happen, my fellow coworkers, really, really appreciate it. If there's one thing that we can take away from tonight and can learn from this amazing group of individuals, is that although we may be separated by state, we all live on or in the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Our goals are the same, and now is the opportunity to take action. Alice is going to drop a link in the chat box, and I strongly encourage you all to speak up for our waterways. It only takes a minute of your time, and if everyone on this call takes one action, we can make a difference overnight. It's amazing. Like I said, thank you all again for joining. We will be sending out an email with the recording of this webinar in the next day or two, along with any links that are going to be shared. If you have any questions, I'll have contact information on there as well that you're welcome to reach out if you didn't get a chance to answer your Q&A question tonight. We'll be answering your questions directly through the additional Q&As that are on there as well. I also wanted to mention that next week we'll have another webinar. It's Conserving and Restoring Virginia's Tree Canopy. This webinar is next Wednesday, November 18th at noon to 1 p.m. This is going to be a really cool webinar. If you haven't been a part of Ann Jerzik's webinar before, you're missing out and this is your opportunity. Spots are filling up fast, so make sure that you register. There will be a link when in the follow-up email that will be coming out. And thank you all again and have a great night. See you all later.
Thank you. It's awesome.
Nottoway.